Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from APA Style, publisher of the publication manual of the American Psychological Association, my guests and I will be demystifying APA Style. Joining me are Chelsea Lee and Timothy McAdoo. Chelsea is instructional lead at APA Style and Timothy is manager. Chelsea and Timothy are on hand to address some of the most frequently asked questions about the formats and guidelines of APA Style, including everyone's favorite, references. They'll also debunk myths, address some of the more unique reference sources, generative AI, anyone? And since APA Style isn't just about references, we'll also learn about their bias-free language guidelines, communicating with visuals, and accessibility. In this first episode of our four-part series, we're introduced to Chelsea and Tim and get up to speed on APA Style's origin story, as well as some of the major updates in the 7th edition of the publication manual. Okay, Chelsea and Tim, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Sure. So why don't we start with some introductions? Can you tell us about yourselves and what you do at the APA?
Sure, I can go first. I've been at APA since 2001, and I started in the journals department where I was copy editing manuscripts. And then I was briefly a training supervisor in journals, teaching APA style to new people in the department, people new to the department. And then for several years, I worked in customer engagement in the Psych Info department, where I learned to create tutorials and webinars for librarians and students who are accessing Psych Info and the other APA databases. And in that time, I was still writing for the 6th edition APA style blog and social media. So in 2016, I joined what was then a new APA style team within the books department. And so my role now is manager of APA Style. Chelsea and I were both involved in crafting the publication manual, editing and consolidating feedback and input from many different voices and points of view. And with the APA Style director and team, we oversaw the manual, refining the guidelines, including creating references and templates that are in Chapter 10. And some things I do now are manage the APA Style 7th edition blog, social media, and newsletter, and QC for things like reprinting of the manuals or making them available as ebooks on Kindle and other platforms.
Excellent. How about you, Chelsea?
So I've been at APA since 2007, and I also started in the journals department doing copy editing. And I've been in the APA style department since it got started around 2015. And I got started being involved in developing what's now our APA product, Academic Writer, helping write the learning content for that product and giving like specs to the developers on like how reference forms should work for APA style references. And then, like Tim mentioned, I worked closely on the development of the 7th edition publication manual and the products that go with that. I helped a lot with the bias-free language chapter, which we'll talk about more later. Helped pick out the reference examples, helped figure out like what the organization of the book should be to help make it easier for people to find things. And my role now is instructional lead for APA Style, which means helping develop like what the guidelines will be and how we're going to communicate them to others. So I do a lot of webinars, I make handouts. I've written a lot of content for the APA Style blog. I was really involved in writing the content for our Mastering APA Style student workbook. And along the way with that, I've developed skills in doing some graphic design for the website and learning about web accessibility standards and making sure that the APA Style products meet accessibility standards.
Fantastic. And now you both can add podcasting to your
We can.
to your outreach as well. So for our listeners who might be new to APA style, can you just maybe provide a brief backgrounder on how APA style originated and why it's needed?
Sure thing. So, APA style originated in 1929 as a journal article published in an APA journal called Psychological Bulletin. And the point of it was to explain to authors how to format their psychology research articles that they were going to be publishing
Mhm.
with APA. And so, like, you people may not know that in addition to APA doing APA style, APA publishes psychological research. We have about 90 psychological journals. So APA style is developing from having that firsthand perspective of the experiences of authors who are reporting the results of psychological science for other scientists.
So did it originated as sort of an in-house kind of style guide, or was it always for researchers as well, or
It was for the researchers who were going to be publishing with APA,
APA?
is
Okay.
how it started. And
Mhm.
then it continues on to also being used by students.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Um, so then the seventh edition of the publication manual came out in 2020, right? What were some of the major updates in that edition?
So was published in late 2019, has a copyright year of 2020, right?
Okay.
Exactly. And really, some notable changes were about references and citations. One big one was that we recommended not including the location of the publisher in references for books, which was a departure from a guideline that went all the way back to the first edition, but it was something people have been asking for a while, and for good reason. So we also streamlined the in-text citation styles to make those guidelines easier to remember and to implement. And we made other changes in the templates to references to make them just more consistent across different reference types.
Hmm.
So overall, the seventh edition had a larger focus on student papers. We included a sample student paper and guidelines for student paper title pages, as well as things like guidelines for annotated bibliographies that students are asked to create. And when we were sort of assessing what the seventh edition should be, we had a focus on accessibility. So we looked at the guidelines with that in mind for whether they made an accessible paper and whether we could do anything to improve the accessibility. So somewhere where that really had a big impact was on the fonts that we recommend using. We still, in seventh edition, recommend Times New Roman, but that's just one of many. And really the focus is on using a font that's accessible for the author and for the reader.
Okay, I was going to ask you what goes into or what is an accessible paper? What makes a paper accessible?
Oh, well, it depends on maybe how it's being accessed as well, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, what are you creating? Are you creating a digital document? Are you creating like a word processing document that you're going to give to your teacher? Are you publishing something? And if so, where are you publishing? How are you publishing it? So there's considerations for the way in which the content's going to be delivered and to whom.
Hmm.
But it generally speaking, say you're making a Word document, you're writing a class or you're writing a paper for a class and you're doing some sort of word processing. A lot of the tools that are built into word processing programs help make things accessible already. So some things would be using heading styles menus to label the headings within your paper so that if somebody's using a screen reader, they can know this is the heading for the method section, this is the heading for the results section, and they can get to that. Other considerations would be things like Tim was mentioning, like what's your font that you're using? Is it big enough that you can read it? Is it a font that everybody has on their computer so that it displays rather than just being like little squares, font not found?
Right.
And then, there's additional considerations too about, say your paper contains figures like bar graphs and you're using color to communicate information. Are you choosing colors that everybody can see and tell apart? And so there's lots of different aspects for sure.
Okay. Excellent. Perfect. So, I suppose, Tim, back from your customer engagement days, I mean, one would think that the APA team has perfected the art of frequently asked questions. Can we dig into some of those? What tends to, what kind of questions tend to arise, and what topics get the most attention from your readers?
I'd say it's definitely references.
Yeah.
We track all the questions we get in some analytics program, and so people definitely ask a lot about references. I would say that most of the questions we get are about specific cases that the people asking think they don't fit the examples and the templates that we provide, and they're not sure what to do, and they're looking for guidance. And so usually what ends up happening is that we show them how the templates and examples do apply. For example, people might not be sure what information to use in the reference. Like maybe they don't know who the author is. They can't figure it out.
Hmm.
And so they'll send us a link to the document and we look at it and we're like, oh, I think it's this organization that's the author. Or they're not sure like what date they should use in a reference, and we can sort of help them figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that's been really interesting since the seventh edition, since Tim and I have been around such a long time listening to these questions, is that the nature of the questions that we get about references has definitely changed since the seventh edition. And we've noticed that people seem to have a better understanding of how references work than maybe they used to. Like we used to get tons of very basic questions like, how do I make an in-text citation? And we don't get as much of that anymore. Now it's more like, there's this strange example I found. Does it have a strange solution for how it should be referenced? And we're like, actually, the typical way of referencing it is probably going to help you. And we show them, how the standard principles can apply to their situation.
Huh, that's interesting. I mean, it might be speculation, but what do you attribute that to, that shift?
I think we did a better job of explaining it.
Right.
Yeah, it was like we had this collection of questions, and we really looked at them all. And one of our audiences is copy editors, and they give us really great insight into like, what you said here doesn't quite match what you said there, and we
Mhm.
tried to cover all of that in the seventh edition, and hopefully we did.
Yeah, it was like more than 10 years of listening to people's questions and answering them and getting a feel for what don't they get? How can we like lay it out there?
Mhm. You just heard from Chelsea Lee and Timothy McAdoo. Chelsea is instructional lead at APA Style, and Timothy is manager. This series is brought to you with support from APA Style. Join us next week when we explore the principles, mythology, and unique forms of reference formatting. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.